In this video, we are going to talk specifically about theater as art and impersonation. Later, we will talk about theater as performance and work, but now we will discuss it as art and impersonation. So we've talked a lot about art already. We've talked a little bit about theater. Let's put them together. Let's talk about art in the theater. Art in the theater is not pure. It is collaborative. Art in the theater is not pure. It is collaborative. So what does that mean? Anybody have any ideas? Art in the theater is not pure. It is collaborative. Well, what it means is that art in the theater is a combined effort, all right? We in the theater, we have a saying that sometimes gets us in a little trouble. Sometimes people might even think this sounds a little arrogant. I'm sure some of you will think this sounds arrogant at first, but bear with me. Hopefully by the end of this spiel, you will see it as more of a humble statement than it is an arrogant statement. And here it is. We in the theater make the claim that theater is the grandest or greatest art form of all. Theater is the greatest art form of all. Now, who would think that that's an arrogant statement? Probably a few of you, I'm sure. But let's talk about why it is that we make that claim, okay? Think about what theater is. It's a collaborative art form, meaning in order for it to exist, it has to take from the world of painting, scenic artistry, people who know how to paint, from the world of musical composition, from the world of vocal artistry, meaning the singers, from the world of choreography and even sculpture, and you add a few things that we put in, like the actor and the director, and many others. And you put them all together and you have this one art form. You see, I would like to claim, like a painter or a sculptor or a poet or something. By the way, poetry is added to the full-scale theatrical production. I would like them to claim that I work as an individual, but unfortunately, I can't. In order for my artistic effort to come to life, I have to rely on the collaboration of all these others. Think about, and I know a lot of people aren't into the world of art, a lot of people aren't in the world of sports, but look at it this way. I often ask my traditional classrooms how many people would pay $175, which is nowadays kind of cheap, actually. How many people would pay more than that? But say $175 to watch a full-scale Broadway production. Not many hands go up. I understand that. I say, who would think that's kind of high? The majority of the hands will go up. But then I'll ask some of those same people, how many of you would pay pay $175 to see your favorite team play Game 7 of the World Series? Among the sports fans, several hands go up. How many of you would pay that money to get a seat at this year's Super Bowl? Among the sports fans, the hands go up. And I explained to them, that's a lot of money for a ticket to a lot of people. Oh, no, it's not. No, the non-sports fans think it is. They wouldn't pay that much for a play. They wouldn't pay that much for a baseball game. So then I talked to the people who are in that sports community. And I say, look at it this way. If you were to go to New York City and walk through an art gallery, which is meaning something that displays painting, for an hour, you would pay $45 just to do that, to walk around and look at all this fine art in the way of oil paintings, maybe even more in some galleries. If you were to go to the ballet, you're going to pay $90 to $110 for a halfway decent, maybe not even that decent, of a seat if you're into that sort of thing. If you're going to go to listen to one of the grand choirs, at that level, you're going to pay $125 to listen to that. If you're into music and you want to listen to a symphonic orchestra, play some wonderful composed pieces for a couple of hours, you're going to pay $150 to do that. And it goes on and on and on, all right? And those ticket prices, if you're into art, and you're in New York City and you want to experience all of the stuff that I just listed and some of the things I've left out, you're going to pay a hefty price. But in the theater, look what you get. If you're in New York, you go to a Broadway production, you're going to get some of the greatest scenic artistry painted by some of the greatest artists that the world has to offer. And those artworks are going to be, 40 feet tall, 60 feet wide. You're going to get new versions of it flying in and out every 3, 4, 5, 6 minutes. All night long, there's new stuff coming in and out, produced by these wonderful scenic artists, the best in the world. You're going to hear from an orchestra who's between you and that stage some of the greatest music ever composed by some of the greatest composers on earth, played by some of the greatest musicians that the world has to offer. And their ability, combined with the notes provided by the composers, can bring you to tears. You're going to hear some of the most beautiful voices sing the lyrics that orchestra is accompanying. Those lyrics being written by some of the greatest poets that the world has to offer. You're going to see all of these things full scale. You'll see some people that we contribute called actors who could tell a story in a way that put the fear of God in you and bring you to tears and make you angry and all of this kind of stuff. You're going to throw in some things like some pyrotechnics, explosions, fancy lighting cues that just are, take your breath away, and, sound cues that do the same thing, and props that are designed to look so real or so monstrous or so, whatever the case might be, that just wow you. It's like, how did they build that? How did they do that? How did they make those people fly around and, say, the production of Spider-Man and have look like they're floating in the air and, fighting in combat? And then we're going to add something. We're going to add a storyline, a plot line that's actually going to entertain you while you're absorbing all this art. And you're going to get all of that for $1.75. For one ticket, $175. So if you're a sports fan, it's like going to the, NBA Finals, it's going to the World Series, it's going to the Super Bowl, and maybe even throw in a Pro Bowl and an All-Star game, and all for the price of one ticket. So if you look at it that way, if you're into the world of art, it doesn't cost that much. So how does that tie in with the note that how does it tie in with the claim that we in the theater think that art is the greatest art form of all? We think it's the greatest art form of all because it is all the art forms. There's no such thing, really, as a theater person opposed to a painter. All we do in the theater is we bring the pieces together and manage them in a way that they become unified in a collaborative effort and tell a greater story to an audience. And for that reason, I think even the other people from the other artistic disciplines will agree with that. The person that's been with me as my scenic artist for 3 decades now often says that she's very thankful to have that outlet. As a painter who might paint on a canvas, very few people will see her work. Very few people will drive to a location to look at her work on display. But because she gets to engage in her wonderful talent, her wonderful capability, and put it to life on a stage, she gets about 1,500 people 3 times a year coming in to look at her work when they purchase a ticket to our show. A choreographer would feel the same way. Someone who writes music or plays music or sings music says, thank goodness for the theater because I get to showcase my talents and ability more in this collaborative effort than I do when my effort is displayed on its own. So art in the theater is not pure. It is collaborative. And that's why I really believe it's an extremely humble statement. I wish we in the theater could say that we work on our own. But no. We work because everybody else in the world of arts exists. We say that theater is also impersonation. And I don't think it's a surprise to anybody, but impersonation is the most important aspect of the theater. In all aspects of the theater, we're impersonating. In all aspects of the theater, we are pretending. Not just with the performances, You watch a play and you go, oh, that real tall guy wearing the stovepipe hat and the black suit and the long beard, whether it's real or fake, that's Abraham Lincoln. That's not really the person who's playing him. That's supposed to be Abraham Lincoln. That's an impersonation. That's pretending. And audience members understand that. But you have to understand that in all aspects of the theater, actually, we are pretending. We are pretending technically, not just performance-wise, but technically. We are pretending that all of the sound that we hear is real. That when we hear, in these days, in this day and time, we have sound files that duplicate rain or thunder or something like this. Yeah. We also have, prior to this, maybe it was on a CD, but you go all the way back to the Greeks, they might have pebbles lying on a tin-bottomed box, and they would roll that around, and it sounded like rain. Or fire, actually. They sound the same way. And they might have a big sheet of tin that sounded like thunder. We use sound files for that now, but we're pretending in that regard. So lights, sound, technically, performance-wise, we are all, in all aspects of the theater, we are pretending. So the question for you becomes, why is this type of impersonation considered part of an art form when other types of impersonation are merely considered to be craft? Think about that. We just talked about pretending. You put a blue gel, that's a little film that you put over the end of a light instrument that's 750 degrees that you can dim or provide intensity to whatever your desire might be. Pushing light through a gobo, which is a little tin device that you put in that instrument that kind of shapes the light into window panes or window blinds or tree leaves or something like this. And it casts those shadows all the way across the room. Why is that type of pretending considered part of an art form when other types of pretending, like maybe the orange in the bowl of fruit that we've been discussing, is considered a craft? Well, here's the answer. All those things are craft. Knowing what to do with the lights, knowing what to do, with this, the fake brick wall, which is just a craft, and so forth, the painting. Knowing what to do to those in a way that moves an audience, gives an audience a sense of fear or anxiety or makes them happy or something like that, is when those things are used to being a work of art. It's kind of like moving the orange from the bowl of fruit to the hands of the Ethiopian child. Same orange, it's craft. The orange is still crafted in both paintings, but now the orange is being used to move people, to capture a sentiment, to touch upon intellectual elusive meanings. So a sound cue is nothing more than a sound effect. It is a crafted piece for the production. But if you put that sound cue at the right moment, marry it with the intensity on an actor's face and some minor chords playing by the orchestra as the lights dim and so forth, and the audience's hair standing up on their arms, now we're using those things as an art form, as a work of art. So the question then for us, those of us involved in the theater who have to work with all of those components, is we always have to ask, is this going too far? Because everything that we're talking about, lights, sound, the performances, the technology, it all has to be geared toward the audience's suspension of disbelief. Everything we do in the theater must be focused toward the audience's willingness to suspend disbelief. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with that saying or that phrase, suspension of disbelief. If you're not, I'll go ahead and give it to you now. Before I tell you what it is, let me tell you, suspension of disbelief is what allows us to laugh at something that we're seeing on stage, or cry at something we're seeing on stage or on screen, or get angry at it or saddened by it, or whatever the case might be. It's because we are willing as audience members to suspend disbelief. I I like the way I was taught suspension of disbelief when I was in college. They said that suspension of disbelief is like an invisible coat that we all wear. We all wear an invisible coat everywhere we go that has the real world all over it. All of our problems. The late babysitter, the run-in with the boss, the bad grade on a test, the utility bills, all of this stuff, a fender bender. We carry those stresses around with us. They're the real world on this invisible coat. And we walk into a theater, into the lobby, ready for a night out, and we make kind of an unwritten, we write out our unwritten contract with the production participants. We say, all right, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take this invisible coat off. I'm going to put it on this rack. I'm going to leave it in this lobby, and I'm going to go into that theater, and I'm going to pretend to be caught up in your world of make-believe. I'm going to pretend that I believe that what I see on that stage is actually going on, right along with those of you who are pretending, as long as you don't go too far. As long as you don't push that creativity over the line. If you don't do that, I will suspend disbelief. I'll tell you, the first time I was ever introduced to suspension of disbelief, and I'm sure many of you went through something similar yourselves, I think I was actually a senior in high school. I was probably a little too old to let this dawn on me, but my dad and I were watching a television show. He was laid out, stretched out on the couch. I was sitting on the end of that couch, and it was a cop show. If you know anything about the late 70s and early 80s, all you ever saw on television were shows with a lot of action, often cop shows with car chases and explosions and stuff like this. And we were watching an episode of something called T.J. Hooker. Some of you may have seen reruns of this. Ask your parents about it. They'll tell you. T.J. Hooker was a cop show, and the principal character, Captain Hooker, was played by a very famous actor at that time, and his name he's still alive at the point of this video, is William Shatner. If you don't know who William Shatner is, if you go back to the original Star Trek episodes from the 60s and 70s, that's the guy who played Captain Kirk. Nowadays, he does the Priceline Negotiator guy commercials. He's older and he's heavy set and he's a very funny man. But back when he was on Star Trek, he was a heartthrob. He was a sex symbol and all of this stuff. And William Shatner had that role. He aged. We aged. We got into around 1980 or something like that. And William Shatner had gotten a little older. But I guess by Hollywood standards and by my mom's standard and people like her, he was still kind of a good-looking guy, they would tell you. He was starting the early middle age, a little gray on the sides. He still had a little bit of a physique going. And I tell you what, anybody who was young and fell in love with Captain Kirk, they were happy at an older age to see him come back as Captain Hooker in this cop show. But unlike Captain Kirk, he was older, so he couldn't do all the physical stuff. So the series gave him a couple sidekicks. One of them was a young lady at the time, Heather Locklear. Her name slipped me for a minute. Heather Locklear played a rookie cop who was under the guidance of Captain Hooker. She was beautiful. She had long, blonde, flowing hair like Farrah Fawcett Majors had at the time. And unlike in real life where you had to put that hair up if you're a lady cop and so forth, she always had it down, and she was chasing the bad guys in slow motion with her hair out. Unlike Captain Hooker, who did everything by the book and wore his uniform perfectly, Heather Locklear's character had kind of a tailor-made police uniform. It was form-fitting. She didn't wear the tie. She'd always button it up to about here, and she'd take off running after the bad guys in slow motion. And Dad and I didn't have a problem believing that at all. We were willing to suspend disbelief throughout all of that. Heather Locklear also had a love interest, a flirtatious interest, I would say. It was another guy. I can't remember his name. He was the actor who replaced Danny Zuko in Grease 2, if that tells you anything. He didn't go too far past that. But he was kind of young and good looking, and he and the Heather Locklear character would always flirt, and Captain Hooker would have to keep them in line. Well, in this one episode, Dad and I are watching it. They got into the climactic moment of the episode. It's the car chase. And Captain Hooker and these other two, they're chasing the bad guys through some inner city street in a rainstorm, through pouring rain. All right? And they're ramping over, intersections, flying over, hanging out the door, shooting with public around and so forth, and shooting pistols out of the bad guy's hands who's swerving around. Had more than 6 rounds in that gun, but nobody cared. It's a 6-shooter, but they were firing off like 25 rounds out of that thing. The scenes, always in the 70s and 80s. They had the little old lady in that car chase pushing a cart of groceries in the pouring down rain. Don't know why she was shopping then. But of course, the bad guys hit her basket, didn't hit her. They should have put that lady in a home. She was in every TV show that was ever made in the 70s and 80s. Somebody should have figured out she was a threat to herself. But they hit her groceries and the cabbage and the eggs and the butter and all of that stuff flew all over the place and hit the windshield of Captain Hooker's police car. And they got a little further out of the inner city, and now they're in some neighborhoods, and they're knocking over mailboxes and going through front yards and stuff. And now they go a little further out of town to where the high school is, and the high school football team is practicing out in the mud and the rain, and they burst through a chain link fence, and now the good guys are chasing the bad guys right down the middle of that football field, and the kids are running to each side. They make their way out of that. Now they're a little out of town in some more rural areas where the farmland is, and they're on a muddy road and dirt road, and they're knocking out mailboxes and barbed wire fences, and chickens are running everywhere. And they came across a curve, and it was like, and my dad grabs the remote and he goes, "Give me a break," like that, and he starts changing the channel. I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I ain't watching that." I said, "Why?" It was exciting. He said, "They ain't going to squall rubber on a muddy dirt road." Well, I hadn't thought about that before. I know you have. I mean, we all go through that moment. I'm thinking, well, you're right. They wouldn't squall tires on a muddy dirt road. But I'm still okay with it. But Dad wasn't. So he starts flipping through the channel. He wants to watch something he could believe. Something a little bit more pertinent to his willingness to suspend his belief. So he starts flipping the channels. Bleep. No. Bleep. Uh-uh. Bleep. Uh-uh. No. Bleep. Finally, he stopped on something. And it was this 30-minute sitcom, an episode of something that was outdated at the time. It was in reruns at that time, called The Beverly Hillbillies. And I know many of you are familiar with The Beverly Hillbillies. And he puts his remote control down. And the first thing we see was that there was this character in The Beverly Hillbillies who had somehow, during the car chase of T.J. Hooker, gotten himself into some big trouble. His name was Jethro. He was as big as a bear. Jethro. You know the guys. Jethro was in trouble, and you could tell because the camera hit his face, and you saw the ever-familiar Jethro swallow. Whenever he was in trouble, he went like that. And boom, that's what we caught. We go, uh-oh, Jethro's in trouble. He did something to make another person mad. And that other person was a little 80-pound woman. She was probably 75 years of age. She's about this tall. Her name was Granny. Now, Jethro could pick his teeth with Granny, but he was scared to death of her. Rightfully so. We should all be afraid of Jethro. And Jethro needed to get out of the way of Granny's wrath. Don't know what it was. I was busy watching T.J. Hooker at the time. And Jethro takes off running full speed on a perfectly manicured lawn of a $40 million mansion, if you can believe these Hicktown people were dwelling there, at 150 miles per hour. How do I know he was running 150 miles per hour? Because they fast forwarded the piano music to right after seeing his face, which, by the way, was the swallow, and he takes off at 150 miles per hour. And okay, there he goes. He's in trouble. Camera comes back. It drops down about 1.5 feet, which made it funny because Granny is short, and it finds Granny. And by the way, halfway through the series of the Beverly Hillbillies, we developed color television, so now they had some new technology. We saw her turn red and then green with anger right before her very eyes. She got so mad that steam shot out of both of her ears to the sound of a tea kettle. We heard it, foo, like that, as she takes off after Jethro. So what she does is she levitates, and her feet, the camera shows her feet, are about 18 inches off the ground. She hits the turf of that perfectly manicured lawn and starts digging a trench about 1.5 feet deep with smoke flying off the soles of her shoes, burning rubber. I heard it. Boom, she pops out of that hole, and she chases after that big old bear-sized man at 250 miles per hour. How do I know that? Because they fast forward the camera even more and play the 250 mile an hour piano music. And she runs and she catches that big old boy. She grabs him by the ankles, starts swinging him around in a circle like that, throws him over a fence where that big old boy lands in a swimming pool that they refer to as a cement pond, where dogs and cats were swimming together in perfect harmony. And my dad's going, go Granny. I'm like, what are you talking about? TJ Hooker can't burn rubber on a muddy dirt road. Everything else could be perfectly realistic, but again, and this can all happen before your eyes. Appears to be somewhat hypocritical. And actually, we all share that hypocrisy, if you want to call it that. But it's not really hypocrisy. What is going on there is, as we know, shows are presented in different styles. Don't worry about this word. We'll talk about it in another video. But they're presented in genres. And some styles or some genres are very near to reality, and some are very exaggerated. The margins of reality are very exaggerated. In T.J. Hooker, you better stay pretty close to reality. In the Beverly Hillbillies, it was almost like a humanistic cartoon. It was almost like an animation, except for it was real people playing the roles. Granny can run at 150 miles an hour because of the genre allowing for those non-believable things to take place. All right? So, think about it. I have seen moments where I lose my willingness to suspend disbelief. I'm almost embarrassed. I never really watched it very much, but on occasion I'd stop on something called The A-Team, an episode of The A-Team. That's where some guys always chase bad guys. They had a big van and they had Mr. T. I pity the fool. That guy, driving that van with his mohawk and stuff, but he was a good guy chasing after bad guys. And in this one episode they were chasing, I'm going to tell you, I know what I'm looking at because I love trucks and I know how to identify a truck. Not by but its make, but also as year model, simply by its color or the trim around the headlights or whatever the case might be. And I'm watching the main characters of the A-Team chase some bad guys who had just stolen a beautiful mint olive green 72 F-150. F-100 actually, a little bitty grandpa truck, but it was brand new. It was mint condition. And it was a showpiece. And the bad guys are chasing that truck. All of a sudden, you see in the distance that beautiful truck driven by the bad guys is about to head into a pile of gravel. That was as tall as half of a house. It's like, oh no, they're not going to damage that truck. And the A-Team's chasing those guys who are getting closer to the truck. I watched that 1972 olive green F-100 approach that pile of chat and go up in the air, and of course there's another camera shot on the other side, and that 1972 mint green Ford F-100 came down as a 1969 green GMC. I know you've seen that before. You're like, what just happened? I'm sure they went out to some lot somewhere, sprayed it to match the other car, and thought the rest of us weren't going to pay that much attention. As soon as I saw that, I could no longer suspend disbelief. It was just too much. If any of you have ever seen the movie Titanic and had the infamous conversation about why didn't he just get up on that piece of styrofoam, whatever that bed frame that she was floating on, and join her, it was big enough, that means you're questioning some credibility issues that make you suspend disbelief. I'm not believing that. I'm not believing he couldn't find something else out there to float on and share the rest of his life with Rose. When those things happen, the best one was in the 70s and 80s. They came up with a trick. They'd have a car parked here. They put a little ramp behind it with a camera on the front end of that car, and the car that was in pursuit would always hit that ramp like it hit that car, fly up in the air. Maybe it was a Ford Pinto. It couldn't hold any more gas in your 2-liter Diet Coke can, and that thing came down, had enough gas in it to blow up 2 city blocks like an airplane wing or something like that, and the car it hit never budged. When in reality, what happens is that car hits it, knocks the other one 20 yards down the road, and the chase is over. We didn't like that very much. They quit doing it because we weren't willing to suspend disbelief. So in the theater, we production people, the directors, the designers, the actors, we always have to ask, is this going too far? Is this too much? Is this too much for them to continue to suspend disbelief? It's a gut call sometimes. You have to have an artistic sense for it. But if you get it wrong, you'll lose your audience.